town. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to come out this morning. And I'm going to be short and to the point. I'm Deidre Gutrath. I'm the current Washington County Farm Bureau president. And I really just appreciate anyone taking the time to get out here and listen to what our representation have been working on at the State House, and also give us a chance to kind of ask some questions and let them know about some of our priority issues for our local area. And I just can't say thank you enough to you guys as our community, and also to our representation and what they do for us at the State House. They've served us well, and we really appreciate their time and dedication to that. We also have, I'll just go ahead, quick introductions. Drew Wright is going to be our moderator this morning, and we're so grateful for him. He's helped us out a lot of years with this, and we're just really grateful to have him be here. I'm sure it'll probably be a pretty mild job for him. So, and then we also have Representative Davisson here this morning and Senator Houchin. So I'm just going to turn the mic over to them and let them go ahead and get started. But thank you again to everyone. Oh, important announcement, sorry, before I do turn it over. I got instructions. I'm not a Salem person, so I apologize if the instructions are not perfect. But restroom facilities are out the doors over here underneath the clock. Go almost to the double doors and turn left, and they're down the hall. Other than that, if there's any other questions, you can ask me, and I'll try and do my best to answer. But that's about the information I have about the facilities. So thank you guys again.
Okay, thank you, Deidre. Yes, we've had restrooms in Salem for many years now. So. Well, welcome to the third House session that's jointly sponsored by the Washington County Chamber of Commerce and the Indiana Farm Bureau. I am Drew Wright, a local attorney, and I've done this for many years. And given my age, I had somebody come up to me recently and say, "Didn't you used to be Drew Wright?" And I said, "Yes, I used to be." But, we're here today to hear from our representatives in the Indiana General Assembly. And we call this the third House session because, we have a bicameral legislature in Indiana. The Senate's the upper chamber, and the House is the lower chamber, and so we consider the public the third house of our government. So this morning what we'll do is we will have each of our guests give an opening statement about their view of current issues of legislature that they're interested in, that are of public interest. And then we'll have questions from you. And so when you have a question, please raise your hand. I will recognize you. Please state your name and any affiliation you have that might be pertinent to your question, and then ask your question. Now, given the fact that there's only one mic, why after the question is asked, I will attempt to summarize the question so that everybody can hear it, and then I'll turn it over to either Senator Houchin or Representative Davisson for a response. So before we get started, I would need to tell you a little bit about our guest. And I'll start with Senator Houchin, who represents us in the upper chamber. And basically, Erin is represented from the 47th district. And I believe all of Washington County is in that district. It includes part of Crawford, Orange, Harrison, Perry, and eastern part of Du Bois County. She's Republican. She was first elected, I believe, in 2014 to the Senate, and she's presently on the standing committees of Commerce and Technology, Elections, Family and Children's Services, Tax and Fiscal, and Utilities. She's a graduate of Indiana University, and she has a master's from George Washington University. She's been active in many political affairs throughout the 9th District and the state, has many honors, and she originally from Scottsburg, lives here in Salem, and her husband is Dustin Houchin, our prosecutor. They have 3 children. They attend the Mount Tabor Christian Church. Representative Davisson, he represents us in the House in the 73rd Legislative District. And that's a very large district that looks like something you would look at a Rorschach ink blot test. That's the way our districts look. And that includes all of Washington County and parts of Orange, Lawrence, Clark, Jackson, and Harrison. Steve was first elected to the House in 2010. He's a Republican. He serves presently on the committees of Public Health, Ways and Means, that means taxes, and he's a pharmacist, and he has a private business here. He also is from Scottsburg, graduate of Scottsburg High, and then Purdue with a degree in pharmacy, and then he's done certain studies since then. He and his wife Michelle have lived in Salem since 1983. They have 5 children and 4 grandchildren. And they're members of the Salem Nazarene Church, and Steve is active in the Chamber of Commerce and Exchange Club. So I'll first call on Senator Houchin. She can talk about things of interest to her in the present legislative session.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you to the Chamber and the Farm Bureau for hosting the third house this morning. I have had a very busy session. I filed 19 bills. 11 of those were passed out of the Senate and have moved over to the House. Fortunately, I'm only carrying 1 House bill in the Senate, so that most of my work was done in the first half. But we've passed all of those bills out of the Senate, and now they've headed to the House. Representative Davisson is taking a couple of those bills for me to shepherd them through the House. So my second half of session will be presenting this legislation in House committees and then hoping that it will pass the House chamber and on to the governor. So I wanted to take a few minutes this morning to talk about some of those bills, and I've got it kind of broken down into the topics that they deal with. So the first I will discuss is education. I have 3 bills that deal in education issues: Senate Bill 182, Senate Bill 407, and Senate Bill 409. Senate Bill 182 deals with superintendent contracts. We have seen over the years superintendent contract buyouts in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money. Some of those school corporations have been in Fort Wayne, in Marion County, in Lafayette, and even closer to home. The contract buyouts can cost school corporations and taxpayers, in some cases, over $500,000 and even up to $1 million in a contract buyout. And so, recognizing that as an issue, I filed a bill that would limit an initial contract for a superintendent to 3 years, and a subsequent contract cannot be more than 5 years. And in addition to that, a contract buyout for a superintendent cannot exceed 1 year's salary or $250,000, whichever is the lesser amount. And when I first filed this legislation, I just had it at 1 year's salary, and the School Board Association said, well, some superintendents make in excess of $250,000. They make $350,000 or more. So knowing that, they suggested the $250,000 cap, which I did in the bill. The interesting thing about that buyout provision is that I met with the School Board Association and the Superintendents Association and worked on this legislation, and through that got some recommendations on how to improve the bill. But the buyout provision currently, under current law, the state law currently says that a superintendent contract cannot be less than 3 years. So we have superintendents that enter contracts that are decades long, and then the buyouts are the remainder of that term. And so this is a taxpayer protection bill. It protects our school corporations. It protects those tax dollars so that they're not going to an administrator that's leaving, ultimately making a school corporation have to pay for 2 superintendents when only 1 is actually working, and reserves more money for the classroom for our teachers and our students. That bill passed out of the Senate 42-8, and Steve Davisson has taken that over in the House. Another education bill is Senate Bill 407. It provides information to teachers regarding the status of their union representation. I have had multiple teachers come to me in confidence. They want to know about their rights, but they don't want to have to contact their superintendent or their local union to get that information. And so this will post their rights online, and it triggers a notification to the teachers in a school corporation when the union representation falls below 50%. In other words, whenever the minority is the union and they're bargaining for the majority, it notifies the school corporation's teachers so that they can have information. That bill passed out of the Senate 32-18. It wasn't without controversy. That was a bill that was not supported by the ISTA, naturally, but it is a teacher support bill. Whether they're in the union or not, teachers should be able to investigate what their rights are while remaining anonymous, and this allows them to do that. Senate Bill 409 is a bill on collective bargaining. This was a bill that the ISTA did support, and that is to move the bargaining window. Currently, teachers and school corporations bargain starting on August 1st and concluding by September 15th. If they, the fall count date is September 15th, and they have to bargain on the certified number. The certified number is certified in the spring and the fall, but for bargaining purposes, the DOE was not certifying that fall count in time for the bargaining window to close. So schools were having to bargain on the spring count number, which is almost never accurate, as you can imagine. And so I had some folks, a Salem teacher, actually a member of the union, said, "This doesn't make sense. Can you do something to fix it?" And so I checked into it and filed a legislation which moves the window starting September 15th, concluding by November 1st, so they can have their count date in bargaining as well as insurance rates. And if the DOE for some reason does not certify that count number in time for bargaining, then it allows the school corporation to bargain based on whatever that count is, whether it's certified or not. And so that bill passed out of the Senate 49-0. It is on to the House, and I have been told it will get a hearing in the House this week. As you can imagine, I filed several pieces of legislation on issues that deal with crime. I'm married to the Washington County prosecutor, and I also previously worked for the Department of Child Services. And so these issues, particularly involving kids, are near and dear to my heart, and I always file some legislation on prosecutor-type issues. Senate Bill 322 requires a DNA sample to be taken on felony arrest, similar to how fingerprints are run through our national database. 30 other states have this legislation. And I did survey that question on the legislative survey, if any of you filled that out, and I think the results were 83% support. So there is a lot of support for this legislation, which again is existing in 30 other states. It doesn't take any genetic information. It only takes the sample that's sent it can only be identified by the person and their gender. It doesn't have race, genetic information, any of those factors. This has been used to solve thousands of crimes across the country. It came close to home in September of last year when there was an 82-year-old man who was randomly shot in Zionsville getting the mail on his 82nd birthday. It was a random murder. The DNA taken from the scene and matched a sample that was taken from the database in Ohio. Ohio has a DNA on felony arrest law. Because of Ohio's law, we were able to quickly identify the suspect and put him in custody. And after the investigation carried on, they found that the same suspect had also been responsible for shooting at police officers and shooting at the Indianapolis-Marion County Law Enforcement Center. And we hope that, the terrible tragedy in Delphi, we hope that DNA will be critical in solving that case as well. That bill passed out of the Senate 36-13. Protective orders and wireless service providers, if you have a cell phone plan currently and you are not the primary account holder, you can't even call and get information about that cell phone plan. You can't change your plan without the permission of the account holder. So if my husband is the account holder and I'm on it, if I call, they say I can only speak to the account holder. This bill will allow, in cases of a protective order, a judge to separate that contract for the victim so they can take their phone, their personal information, their email, their contacts, everything that they need for their support system. And that bill passed the Senate 49-0. A couple of others that I will touch on. This is an issue that's very important to the community here, is the terrible drug crisis that we have in the state of Indiana. Indiana is 8th in the nation for the number of opiates prescribed per 100 persons. In Washington County, that accounted for nearly 3.5 million pills, just opiates, floating around Washington County in 2015. And that number for 2016, although I don't have the data, it was on from the end of year, September to the end of the year, it was on track to exceed those numbers. And that's just Washington County. Statewide, there were 15.9 million prescriptions written for opiates in the state of Indiana. There are only 6.4 million people in Indiana, so that's more than one prescription for opiates for every person in our state. That accounted for 1.16 billion pills that are in our communities, inundating our communities. So Senate Bill 408 is about our INSPECT program. It's the prescription drug monitoring program. Steve's very familiar with it as a pharmacist. But this requires that if a prescriber wishes to write a prescription for opiates, they register with INSPECT. They search a patient's history for the 12 months prior, and they do another search every 90 days if 90 days has elapsed since the last time that patient showed up. You might ask why we have to do this. Why do we have to have a law that asks doctors to register with INSPECT, the prescription drug monitoring program, and then search INSPECT? Well, only 44% of eligible doctors who are writing prescriptions for opiates are registered with INSPECT. And of those, only about 17% are regularly searching INSPECT. Now we know that folks that are looking to get their hands on as many prescriptions as possible can, under our current system, go to multiple doctors in a day. And if those doctors are not searching INSPECT, and I'm not saying that they're doing anything that's wrong, just that they rely often on the patient's word if they're getting other prescriptions. And so if a patient goes to 5 different doctors in one day, they might be able to get their hands on 5 different prescriptions for opiates. They can go to different pharmacies and fill those, and the INSPECT data is only pushed out of the pharmacy system every 24 hours. So in theory, under the current system, they can get their hands on many pills. And they found a high school student recently up in northern Indiana had 600 pills he was dealing at school. And so this is a very serious issue. We know that addiction to prescription pain medicine often leads to a heroin addiction, and we've seen every day, it seems like we read about another overdose death. And so this is an attempt to cut down on the supply of opiates that are in our communities, because we can treat it on the back end. We can do all the treatment we want to, but if we don't stop it before it becomes a problem, then we're going to just continue to have rising healthcare costs, incredible rising numbers of overdose deaths. And so Senate Bill 408 is aimed at getting at the source, and it passed the Senate 49-0. A couple of other things I'll touch on. The state police are, as we have learned over the last few years in talking with state police officers and knowing the very difficult job that they have, they are vastly underpaid in comparison to other jurisdictions, other states that are nearby. They haven't had a pay raise since 2008, and so a 20-year officer in the state police makes often $15,000 less than a 3-year officer at a local jurisdiction. And so I have a bill that will not only increase their pay, but it will index that to inflation so that they will not continue to fall behind again as we move forward. My bill on state police salaries did not get hearing. However, I will say that it is in the House budget, and the Senate Appropriations Chairman is also supportive of giving the state police a raise. So I do believe that they will get that much deserved raise this year. And finally, in the state of Indiana, it is we require if a minor child wants to get an abortion that they have their parents' permission. And this bill certainly is not without controversy, but what has been happening after this law has passed is that minors are taken to these clinics, whether they're in human trafficking situations or they just don't want their parents to know about it. They're having, people are taking kids to clinics to get abortions without even notifying the parents. They're posing as a parent. And there's no requirement that the person taking them to the clinic is the actual parent. So this adds a provision that if a minor child is taken to a clinic, that the person bringing them has to provide proof that they are in fact that child's parent, so that they cannot continue to subvert the law, which is that you have to have parental consent. There is another process that we have called judicial bypass. Judicial bypass is in a case when the parents don't consent, that a juvenile can go to court and ask a judge to give them permission to go do that without their parents' permission. What I think the issue is now is that currently a juvenile can go to court, get a judicial bypass, without the parents ever even knowing about it. And so we require that the parents be notified in the case of a judicial bypass hearing, so that they can participate in that court hearing and be able to provide testimony. It doesn't mean that the parents can have a veto power, and that in fact it's quite the contrary. If the parents, they provide testimony, if the judge believes that the child is old enough or mature enough or et cetera to make that decision, they can still authorize the juvenile to do that without consent. But what we're trying to avoid is for that to be happening without the parents' knowledge. If a child gets into, maybe if they steal a candy bar, if they have a drug charge, the parents will be notified of that court hearing. The only case in the state of Indiana where a child can go to juvenile court without their parents knowing is to access abortion. And so this is one that we passed out of the Senate. It was 36-13. That's going on to the House. But it's not a pro-life bill as much as it is a parental rights bill, so that parents have the opportunity and the knowledge, because this is a minor child, who is going to get a medical procedure. If their parents don't know about that and they should come home and have complications, etc., kids can't get their ears pierced without their parents' permission. They can't have any other kind of surgery without their parents' permission. So this is really a bill about strengthening parental rights in these cases. So those are some of the things I've been working on. I know I've had a very, very busy session, but it's my pleasure and honor to serve you in the General Assembly. I'm glad that you're all here today, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Senator Houchin. And now we'll hear from Representative Davisson. He'll give you his report on matters occurring in the legislature and do his district. Steve?
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. And thank you to the Chamber and Farm Bureau for hosting this day, and for all of you for coming out today on this beautiful morning. First of all, I am on the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm also on the Public Health Committee. So most of my activity occurs in those two committees. One of the bills that I'd like to talk about, first, I'll just talk about a couple bills and we can get to some questions. But I have a bill that I actually drafted, and then the Department of Education came to me and heard I was working on this, so they said, we're working on another bill in the Senate that we'd also like you to kind of work with them to come up with the same language so we could have dual bills going. And this is a Senate Bill 392. It's emergency medication in schools. And what happened, if many of you might know, you've seen this on the news, I'm sure, the schools, I think in 2014 we allowed schools to have EpiPens in the school system for kids that might have allergic reaction or anaphylaxis, and they needed to have an emergency EpiPen shot, epinephrine. So it seemed like it was going to work out okay until if many of you might have watched the news, the EpiPens shot up from like $80 to $100 to $600 plus for a 2-pack. And so that became very concerning to us, because it's, if a school has to have 2 or 3 of those in each building, or even a couple, that would be very expensive and adds a lot of money to them. So I got to investigate, and I said, we can actually buy epinephrine in the ampules, the old style, for about $10 a dose. And school nurses are qualified to administer that. So we said, well, let's take the EpiPen auto-injectable provision out so they can get the EpiPens if they want to, or they don't have people that are trained to be able to use the other. But let's give them the option to buy the other and use that in the school if they want to as well. And so there are some grants available that schools can get those kind of medications. So the Department of Education said, that's a great idea, but we'd also like to say, how about a couple other emergency drugs like albuterol for kids that have an asthma attack? That can be a life-threatening situation as well. So we added albuterol so that the schools can also get that. And then the last one, which Senator Houchin was talking about, the opioid epidemic, we thought about Narcan might be important to have in the schools, because just as she mentioned, one student had 600 pills in the school, and if a child gets a hold of those, and I mean, I already know that there's been situations in our schools around that where kids have picked up their parents' pills and brought them to school. You never know what's going to happen, so it would be a safety measure for the school to have that. It could save some lives, and I think that's very important, because we want school to be a safe place for our children, and we don't want them to have to worry, parents to have to worry about their safety and having those types of problems happen. So we passed that bill out of the Senate and the House, and it actually, and I amended that also because I had another piece of language I wanted to put in there. Many of the EpiPens only come out with 6 or 8 months dating on them. So the problem was, you know, you can buy them for the school. You might have to buy another one before the end of the year because they have short dating, expiration dates. So we decided, we talked with some of the manufacturers and the pharmacy chains, and we decided that we're going to make it so that they at least have to have a 12-month dating once they come out of the pharmacy. And that way, parents that buy them and bring them to school won't have to buy 2 during the year or replace those and things like that. So that gives, I think, a little bit better economic value for those types of things for a lot of parents. So that's one of the bills I worked on and passed. It passed unanimously in both houses. Another bill that I'm working on, which I have a hearing next week on in the Senate, we passed it out of the House, is House Bill 1541. And this came about because everywhere I go around the whole district, in town halls and third houses and things, I always have people talk, when we talk about the addiction problem in our state, people always say, you know, they always come up to me and they say, well, you know, we tried to get somebody into this program, but it was going to be 12 weeks because there wasn't any openings. Or we can't find a place to bring someone, you know, to get them in, our cousin or our friend or our family member or whoever into a program to be able to get them treatment. So, you know, as I started investigating more, I realized that we really don't have a lot of addiction treatment infrastructure in our state. We're really short-handed on that. You know, we talk about underserved areas. Well, in reality, our whole state's underserved. Even Marion County, where you'd think there'd be a lot of treatment programs, and there are, there's not enough to really meet the need. So what we decided, I sat down with some of the folks from different organizations from mental health and addiction, and we started talking about how to put together a bill that we could actually get treatment out, because to build that infrastructure is going to take many years. So we said, we need to do something now. We need action. So what we decided to do was came up with a team of, we call it an addiction treatment team. And what it amounts up to is we'll have a nurse practitioner, a PA, or a doctor that will go in and work with a licensed addiction counselor and a recovery coach, because we feel like we need comprehensive treatment. We can't just go in and detox them and throw them back out on the street. We can't just give them medication-assisted treatment and think that's going to do it. They need the counseling. They need to follow up. They need the medication-assisted treatment. They need the whole works. And the recovery coach, those people have been there. They know how the problems and things that they face, the challenges. So we did that, and they're going to be funded through sort of as on a bundled rate through Recovery Works, which comes from the Forensic Treatment Services Grant. And so we'll have money available for that. Hopefully it'll be a cost savings. And these folks can go into jails. They can go into a church. They can go into doctor's office building. They're mobile, so they can go wherever the need is. They can treat underserved areas. And I think it really will pay off in the long run. And the most important, well, not the most important part, but one of the important things I think is when you get people like that have that problem and you get them cleaned up, they need to have a job. You need to give them something so they can actually get back on their feet. And so we worked with DWD to come up with a program where they will work with them that once they're hireable, they can get a job through one of their programs and get a job and get back on their feet. So I think that's going to be very useful. We're really excited about it, and I've talked with our new executive director of addiction and treatment program about it. All the folks up in Indianapolis seem to be on board, so we're looking forward to getting that in place. So with that, I'll stop and we can go into questions. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative Davisson. Before we get into our question and answer period, I'll just point out where Senator Houchin and Representative Davisson are in terms of the General Assembly schedule. This year's the long session, and the projected adjournment date for the legislature, I believe, was April the 21st. And so we're about 2/3 of the way through the session. There are still bills getting second and third read, and once they pass both houses, then we'll have all the conference committees to iron out final forms of the bill. So there's plenty of time left in the session, so if there's a matter of legislative interest that you have, why you can still have your input that might be meaningful in the legislative process. So we'll get started, and again, as I say, if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll call on you. Just state your name and affiliation, and then state the question, and then we'll get started. So who wants to be first? Over here, this gentleman.
Daniel Benko from Corydon, Indiana, and I'm sorry I say Corydon because I'm from Michigan. I haven't gotten the dialect down here. First of all, Senator and Representative, hats off to you for having this meeting, first of all. Kudos to you. The reason I'm bringing this up, I'll try and set it up a little bit. I was diagnosed diabetic when I was 6 years old. In this country, I am protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, from what I understand in the state of Indiana, with the original Religious Freedom Reformation Act, it would have been legal for an EMT, a doctor, a nurse to look at me and say, you know what, yeah, you're born in America, you live in Indiana, we have to protect you, you're diabetic. If I was born gay, they would have had every right to say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not working on you. That's against my religion, it's against my beliefs, however they phrase it. In this country, my understanding is the United States government has backed out of dealing with equal protection for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. They have put it up to the state's responsibility. My question to you, Senator Houchin, because I don't believe I'm represented by you representatives, so no offense to you, but Senator Houchin, if a bill were to come up for either debate and or voting in the Indiana Senate that would in any way, shape, or form to allow discrimination to one of your lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender constituents, either purposely or inadvertently, number one, what would your stance be on that issue? And number two, could you give just a brief description of your rationale for your stance? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Daniel Benko from Corydon basically has asked a question that basically deals with the interplay between the American Disability Act and the Religious Freedom Reformation Act, and in those cases, if you have certain protections under the ADA, can that be overridden by a particular service provider's religious preference? And he believes that a lot of that's being delegated now down to the states from the federal arena, and so if legislation came up in Indiana that might impact discrimination, either intentionally or unintentionally, against the gay and lesbian community, how would the legislators react to that? So Senator Houchin, the question was addressed to you. We'll answer each from the table so that we just don't have to shuffle back and forth.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for being here. I don't believe that anything would trump the Disability Act. I think that there'd be a Hippocratic oath that no matter your status, that you'd be taken care of. In terms of any debate or voting that allows discrimination, I certainly would not support legislation that would discriminate against anyone, whether that's based on their religious belief or their gay, lesbian status, any of that. I will say that there was a bill this session that was on bias crimes. It did not get a hearing, but I supported the bias crimes legislation, which would be crimes committed against those categories of folks that we are talking about, including based on their religious choices. We've seen some bomb threats to Jewish community centers in Indianapolis, etc. I supported the bias crimes legislation last session, and I plan to support the bias crimes legislation again. However, it did not move forward this session.
right, next question, please. Yes, sir.
I'm Dennis Stockdale, Superintendent of East Washington Schools, and appreciate you guys coming out on Saturday morning. I know it's tough, especially this session. But what I want to address, two things. One, I've seen a growth in this over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's really seen its escalate this year, is we probably need more support in our schools for mental health. Our guidance counselors are we know that, they're overworked, underpaid, we don't have enough. However, there are scopes and things that go on inside schools that are beyond their capacity. So if, as you're looking through your legislation and looking at mental health for both the students and the parents and support, it would be greatly appreciated. There's an epidemic there that probably needs to be addressed. My second point is I support school choice. I don't even want to get into that discussion because, hey, we all have to do our jobs. Schools have to do their jobs. I welcome competition. What I would ask is, and particularly looking at Senate Bill 309, the net metering bill, is allow us opportunities to be creative, because if we can be creative in our school systems, we can drive more dollars to the classroom. And I'm just asking not to restrict us from being able to be creative. And I think there's an opportunity with the net metering for schools to do something that will benefit the communities.
All right, we have a question from Dennis Stockdale, who's superintendent of East Washington Schools in our county, and he's addressed 2 issues. He sees the need for more school support staff for mental health issues that the students are experiencing. And then in regard to the whole school choice arena, he would like to see that public schools would be a little more creative in facilities and curriculum that would allow them to compete with perhaps charter schools. So any comment that either of our guests would like to make to Mr. Stockdale's questions?
Well, I can talk about the mental health part, and I agree with you 100%. I work with a lot of the mental health groups around the state and the nation, and so one of the big problems that we've seen is that our counselors in our schools, they aren't being able to counsel kids to direct them for careers. They're having to do counseling for home and social issues more than they are for the careers, which we've been talking about that. That's a big issue because we really want the young kids, especially the kids that's in middle school, to start looking at the career paths that they could take in high school so they could plan ahead and get those career goals in place. And so when the counselors are being taken, so much of their time up with all these other issues, it really is putting a huge burden on them. So I know exactly what we're working on, trying to find ways we can help with that. But yeah, it is a problem, and I understand. I have a wife and a daughter-in-law that work in the public school system here in Salem, and I know quite well what you're talking about.
Yeah, I want to touch on that too. I'm the chairman this year for the Indiana Commission on the Status of Children, and they had several different task force, and I'm new to the commission this year, but my office mate is Senator Randy Head, and he has been on the task force for this issue, which we recognize is becoming more and more of an issue as we see the drug crisis continue. So he has 3 bills that have all passed the Senate that are moving on to the House that deal with this very issue. One is a suicide prevention coordinator in schools, funding that. I think you'll see that some of these programs that he has put forth will start as a pilot to get some data back on what exactly those needs are. But we are aware that this is an issue, and there are bills moving this session that will address some of those concerns. On 309, I heard a lot of testimony on this. I was on the Utilities Committee, and I believe the bill is moving in the right direction, and I think it will continue to move in the right direction as it goes through the process. And we've already made certain exceptions, like if you are on municipal power or you are an REMC customer, those have been carved out so it does not apply to them. They can still do whatever it is that they were doing before and can continue to do. I expect, and I'm not the author of the bill, but I do expect that we will see some carve-outs for schools After all, the state funds the schools. If they can find savings with installing solar panels, well, then we should be encouraging that. So I would certainly support 309 changing in a way that would continue to allow schools to be innovative in that way.
Thank you. Next question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dave Gottbreath. I'm from the Pekin area. I guess I better say that I am a farmer, and so that's one of the things I'm representing. But I'm also on the Telemedia Solutions Board of Directors, and I know that one of the problems is we have, even in Washington County, lots of underserved areas for the internet, and I know we're trying to work on solutions to get them there. But I also ask that when you're doing that you look out for the people that are the companies that are already in existence that are trying to provide. We've got a goal to provide fiber to every home in our service area, and so we want some kind of protection for our investment when we're trying to do that. So we're interested there. And then the other question that I would have as a farmer is where we're going on the roads and bridges, and because we need good infrastructure, local infrastructure, to be able to get people and crops where they need to go. So thank you.
All right, thank you. David Gottbreath, who operates a farm on Dutch Creek, he is also on the board of directors of Telemedia Communications, which used to be called the Washington County Rural Telephone Co-op. And so he has two items of interest for our guests to address. One is the whole idea of rural broadband and how do we support it, and how do we protect investment that certain utilities have already made trying to provide rural broadband. And then secondly, he has a question about the status of infrastructure funding and development for roads and bridges. So, Representative Davisson.
Thank you, David, for the question. I know you guys, from what I hear, you guys are doing an outstanding job with the internet, because we've heard a lot of folks in your service area that's talked about how good the product is that you're providing. So I think that's great. As far as the service areas and protection, I think there's probably some built-in things in that should help hopefully down the road when you guys are getting when they roll out more areas of different companies that come in. But I know Erin has done a lot more with the internet broadband legislation than I really have been involved with, and I'll let her talk more about that. But I will talk about the road funding if you want me to, because I was on the Ways and Means Committee that actually moved that bill. First of all, we've got a couple choices. We've had a couple different committees or organizations that have done studies that said we need about $1.2 billion a year for a 20-year plan down the road to make sure that we've got good roads and safe bridges. We have bridges around our communities that are 75 years old and older, and haven't been updated. And, we want to make sure that those roads and bridges are safe to get our kids to school and to travel on and go to work and all those things. So as we look at these, there's a couple different options we could do, and they've been studying it for several years. I think 3 or 4 years they've been working on this bill, and the bill came out. I wasn't real crazy about it to start with, and I'm still not real crazy about it, but it's one of those things where, if we want stuff, we're going to have to pay for it. Somebody's got to pay for it. That's the bottom line. If we want good roads, we want good bridges, we want safe communities to travel on, we have to pay for it. So the gas tax had never been increased since 2003. So there had never been any increase for the cost of living that had put on that. So they figured up what the cost of living indexed. They indexed it to the cost of living. It came up to about 10 cents a gallon. So that was one of the things that they wanted to implement. That would help to get some more money into a dedicated road funding project. Also, they looked at, a $15 increase in registration fees for cars. That money would go into the Community Crossings Matching Grant program. So we have, which we had last year, some of the communities, our communities here got some money. They got quite a bit of money to work with the roads. Actually, it was a 50-50 match. The new provision says it's going to be a 20-80 match, so the local communities will have to come up with 20%, which will be a lot better. We've increased funding, or the charge for the fee charge on the big trucks, the motor carrier surcharge fuel taxes, and the way that they're doing that. They've increased that. Some of those taxes had never been increased since, 1988. So some of those different things that we're adding to it to try to create more income to come in, so that we make sure that we get the money for the local roads as well as the highways and state roads that we have to take care of. Purdue had a study that said one of the big loaded semis does the same damage to the road as 2,700 cars. And if anybody's been on I-65, you know how many big semis go up and down that road. So they're really beating pretty hard. I drive every day back and forth, and I run into potholes and things all the time because it's hard to keep maintenance with all that heavy traffic. So another provision that we're doing is we're shifting the 4.5 cents of sales tax that's collected on gas. We're going to shift that over into the road funding fund too. Previously, only 2.5 cents of the sales tax was going into road funding. The other part was going into the general fund. So we're trying to shift that over into there. So it looks like the part that I didn't really like to start with, one of the parts I didn't like, was that there was a study on tolling. And in our communities, tolling is a real problem because of the bridge. Now we have a lot of people cross the bridge to go to work. And I said, in southern Indiana, we've got people already paying $4 a day to go to work in Louisville. And I don't think it's fair to start talking about tolling 65 or 64 or some of those other roads. So in committee, I actually voted against the bill because of that. I didn't feel like it was a burden I wanted to put on our local folks. So Chairman Tim Brown, when he brought the bill to the floor, he had a second reading amendment that he actually exempted 75 miles from any tolling bridge or toll road from ever being tolled. So that was put into the bill, so I felt like, at that point, I probably needed, since they answered some of my concerns, I felt like I needed to vote for it. So I did vote for it in the House session. So now it's moved on to the Senate, and they're working on it over there, kind of looking at different things. We have a couple of options. We either do something like this where the user pays for the cost of these roads and bridges, or we look at, doing things like long-term bonding, which we've done in 2002. Actually, 30-year bonds that we're still paying on, almost $100 million a year for roads that have had to be redone 2 or 3 times. So, do we want to pass this on to our kids to pay for, or do we want to take care of it ourselves and pay as we go? So that's the 2 choices we have, I think. So I'll stop there and let Senator Houchin talk.
Well, as always, when things come over from the House, they're bound to change in the Senate. The House likes to joke that House Senate bills go over there so they can be improved. Yeah. And the Senate likes to joke that House bills come to us so we can improve them. But there's always a change so I do expect some changes to the road funding bill. I think we will certainly fund our long-term road projects. The question is not if we're going to do it, it's how we're going to get there. Steve's right that the gas tax was never indexed to inflation since 2003. So there is a significant gap in that. And if we just index that tax alone, we just said we're going to index it to inflation, period, that would generate about $800 million. So there are things that we can do. I'm very, very sensitive to overtaxation, particularly in this area, because we have now people driving across the toll bridge. They would see an increase in their gas tax, an increase in their registration fee, possibly a toll on the roads. And so that would be a quadruple tax for people in southern Indiana that I cannot support. But I do think that we'll find a way to fund the roads at some point. But I appreciated Steve's advocacy to at least mitigate that somewhat in the House version of the bill. And I'm on the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee. I sit on had a joint committee meeting with the Transportation Committee and the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee this week on road funding, where they outlined all the needs. But we also had some folks come in and there were some conservative groups that came and testified that don't want us to see any tax increases at all. And there was a gentleman there who's from a watchdog group that went through the House version of the bill and said these are some funding mechanisms that we can get behind, and these are ones that we absolutely can't support. And so I'm going to take a good look at that. I want to try to find a way to fund the roads without increasing taxes, but we'll see how we get there at the end. I do think we'll fund the roads. About broadband, I'll say a few things. You probably heard about the Agile Network deal that was an Ohio company that the state of Indiana, under the former governor, entered into a contract with, or attempted to enter into a contract with, that would have given this Ohio company basically exclusive rights to state-owned right-of-ways. They were going to pay $50 million to have exclusive rights to state-owned right-of-ways. And during the course of that debate, I've been a champion for broadband for a really long time, especially in our certainly in our rural areas. Senate District 47 is one of the most underserved areas, and I'm continually working on legislation and moving things that I think will get us closer to that goal. But when this deal came out, it was just, quite frankly, a bad deal, right? So people like Telemedia Solutions would be in direct competition with this Ohio company that was supported by the state financially, or at least given them a boost. Even though they were paying us to use that right away, they could in turn turn around and rent it, if you will, or lease it to our Indiana companies. And we've got several companies like Smithfield Communications and French Lick, Telemedia Solutions. They have already made investments in broadband, and this would put an out-of-state agency or company supported by the state in direct competition with people who've already invested millions of dollars here. And so I did not support the Agile Network deal, and in fact, we had several meetings where members of our caucus were pushing back on our leadership because it was it's just not right. It is what it is. It wasn't a good deal. Maybe it was a good deal for Agile Networks. Maybe it was a good deal for the state, but it wasn't a good deal for our small businesses and providers that are existing here. So that did get thrown off the table, and it's no longer in the mix, and I was glad to see that happen. I'm going to continue to work on things that get us to where we need to be on broadband. One of those things, and I will say that Farm Bureau has not been supportive of this, but it is to allow the RMCs to utilize their existing infrastructure above ground, no digging, to install broadband and be able to offer that service. And so that's a means to getting broadband to the rural areas. You know that before the rural areas had electricity, the REMCs came in and did that. They are trying in many ways to service that need for southern Indiana and other rural areas where the REMCs you may see them start to be a broadband provider. And originally I think that the bill did discuss underground or digging on properties, and it was amended in Utilities Committee, so it doesn't do that. It's only on their existing infrastructure, and it's nothing underground, so there's no disruption of the property. And I think it's certainly a much better bill in that regard, and hopefully it will help us get to where we need with broadband. But I'm always working on this issue, and will continue to. I would like to see us do some kind of public-private partnership where we can go in and award communities funding to build out their infrastructure, whether that's a school corporation or a city or town. I did the Broadband Ready Communities bill a few years ago, where somebody gets certified broadband ready through the Ball State University Broadband Center. That was to say to providers, we've done everything we need to do locally in terms of streamlining permitting and zoning to be ready for broadband deployment. But only a handful of cities and municipalities have gotten broadband ready at that, since that took place. So I would like to see us do a broadband ready communities grant program similar to Stellar Communities. or regional cities where we designate some funding for broadband build out in these much needed, not just underserved, but unserved areas.
Rural broadband has been a thorny issue just simply because the lack of density along the line, and how do you recover the cost when you don't have that many customers per mile. But there are some things going on in our area where this may be improving in a couple of years. Yes?
Drew, I'm wishing to make a statement instead of asking a question, and Sabrina, I think, can back me up. Washington County Economic Growth Partnership has been working with Mainstream, and they're bringing a line in from the west and also the south. They already have, I believe, 70 miles of fiber laid in this county, so that's something that I didn't know whether anybody else was aware of or not. They're bringing fiber to Washington County.
Yes. Jack McHerron just pointed out that the Washington County Economic Growth Partnership has been consulting with Mainstream, which is a communications organization out of Brown County, I believe, and they are doing some broadband lines, fiber optic lines in Harrison and in Washington County, and they're focusing on trying to serve the schools, and they do have some lines up in Salem now, so we'll see how they're able to do. Next question, yes.
I'm Joy Godfrey. I live in Salem. My husband is a dairy farmer here. I teach school in Orleans, and my question is always school and school funding for the most part. Steve, on your survey, and a lot of people in this room need to know that it says that the state spends a total of nearly $7 billion in education funding directly to public schools. A lot of farmers in here, and we're property owners also. First of all, the county dollars do not go to the general fund anymore. The state funds the general funds. So when you say that information, it kind of, and then he goes on to ask, do you want more funding, decreased funding, or hold education flat? But you kind of need to know what the situation is with our county schools. My superintendent gave me the figures for 2012 through 2016. Between 15 and 16, Orleans had 18 less we had 18 more students from 15 to 16. But our our money was $254,000 less between those two, between that year with 18 less kids. Choice, okay, that's great. Every kid in Indiana has a choice of what school to go to. They can go to any public school if they want to. According to the Choice Scholarship Program annual report, voucher participation grew 4.9% this year, which grew the cost 8.4%, which cost $146 million for 16-17. Of that percentage, 54.6% of those kids never went to a public school, which accounts for $80 million of that amount. So my question is to you, because most of your district is rural schools, and what are you specifically doing to help rural schools? Because the percentages I've seen, 1%, 2%, is less than what the recession was, because my figures for Orleans was before the recession. So Mr. McClintock said if we went back even more to see our funding. What are we going to do? Because this amount spent for schools does not reflect what's being supported with our southern Indiana rural schools. There's a lot of money going to schools, but southern Indiana rural schools aren't getting it. So what are you guys doing to support West Washington, Salem, Eastern, Orleans, Paoli, all these small schools? And we're going to get back to the point where Erin mentioned the state police hadn't had a raise since 2008. There's a lot of school teachers, especially the ones that began, they've not had a raise in 6 years either. And we're going to get to the same point that we are with that. And that's going to be an issue, and we just keep avoiding the issue here in southern Indiana. We're not getting any more funding. Even though it looks like, and a lot of these people when they read these surveys are thinking, man, those schools are getting a lot of money. You know, it's kind of misleading to that. So what's your solutions to that?
Okay, Joy Godfrey, who lives on a farm near the Middle Park of Blue River. She's a teacher in Orleans, and basically her question is, the disadvantage of rural schools and the way that schools are funded right now in the state of Indiana, and basically she'd like comment from our 2 representatives about that.
Thank you, Joy. I know we've discussed this several times, and I will tell you, first of all, here's one of the problems. Okay, the $7 billion goes into the general fund. Okay, that goes and distributed out per student across the state. So, Erin and I both have talked about rural school grants. We've talked about those before, but we can't get any traction because Tim Brown said, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, says, I'm funding students, I'm not funding school systems. He's very firm about that, so he won't even discuss that, put that on the table. We've talked about it, we've tried to get it. I have several of my Republican colleagues that filed bills for it, but they couldn't. He isn't willing to do that. I don't know, we can't get around that. What we did do, which we hoped would help funding, was we increased the foundation per student. So even though some of our rural schools are losing population, losing count, they'll be getting more per student on the foundation side. Hopefully that will help some. I don't know. I've looked at some of the school runs. Some are okay, some are not. It just depends on the schools. I expect probably Orleans. Now, you said that they gained students but lost money. Were they in a transition to foundation from where they were from before? That's probably why that happened. Because there were several schools that we're trying to bring the per student dollars closer together because there was such a discrepancy for a long time. Some schools were getting $3,000 and $4,000, well, even more than that, probably $5,000 more per student than what some of the other schools were. So now it's down to, I think, about $2,000 difference is where it fits in now. So we're trying to get that brought to where the students, it costs the same to educate a student in one place that it does another, basically. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. Another thing we did, which I hope will help out, and I hope our superintendent appreciates this as well, is we've tried to break down some of the funding silos so that they've got more flexibility with the funding so that they can use the money where it's needed and not always just have it tied into certain things. I hope that helps you, Superintendent.
It will help.
I think it will. It seemed like it was a good thing. There was a few questions about it, but I think overall it's going to help us, some of our smaller rural schools especially. Those are some of the things that we've been trying to do to help the schools. I know, it's always one of those things. We're increasing 2.8% over the biennium this time, and that's right now. Now, that was based on December forecast, revenue forecast. We won't really know till the April forecast comes out. And, hopefully there'll be more money in the forecast, and maybe we'll have more money that we can put in. We don't know right now, but we'll know here real soon. Within the next month, we'll know pretty much how much money we have to work with. So, I've always been an advocate for our small schools. Like I said, my wife and my daughter-in-law work in the school. My grandkids go to the school. All my kids graduated from public school here in our community. So, I'm a big supporter of our schools, and I want to see them be successful. And I think we have very good schools. But we just sat in our meeting in Ways and Means the other day where we have a school in Gary, Indiana that's $100 million in debt. It's been mismanaged over the past several years. It's lost most of its students because they didn't have heat for a while in their school. They didn't have, their facilities have just totally been wrecked. I mean, when we talk about the charter schools and stuff, I can understand why some of these parents would want to get their kids out of those schools because it was so mismanaged. They owe, I think it's over $20 million just to their vendors. The food people almost cut them off with the food because of this. So, we have to do something because we have to keep a public school open up there. So we may have to go in as a state and try to, help that school out to do something we can get them back on their feet. I don't know, they're putting a financial manager in there to try to help them. It's just one of those deals where they've had a lot of mismanagement over the years, and it's all added up, and then they've lost population because people have moved out of Gary to other areas. And they used to have, I think they said they used to have 30,000 students. Now they're down to like 5,800 students. So that's just been over the past 30 years or so, 20, 30 years. So anyway.
So Indiana spends more on more of its budget on education than almost every state in the nation. We spend 51.5% on K through 12 education. We spend up to 63% of the state budget when you add in higher ed. The remainder of the money that we have goes to everything else. So we place a high priority here on education funding. I do want to touch on a few things. The time frame that you described was during the transition to foundation. When we capped property taxes, that would have placed a burden on the schools that would have made it an instant impact. And so what they did was when they capped property taxes, they took what had been funding schools off the property tax rolls, and the state took over that responsibility through the general fund. They determined that the fairest way to distribute school funding was to pay per student, the number of students you're educating. And so there is a per student amount that that follows the student no matter where they go. That amount had to be transitioned down to a foundation amount, which is considered the amount that is the baseline for everybody. After that, you add on complexities. Complexities can be the type of population you're educating, like a high poverty area. And so once you add back in those complexities, that will be the difference in the per student amounts that schools are receiving. So the issue of the money following the student, that's the fairest way we can distribute funds. There still are differences in how much schools receive, but if you saw schools over that transition to foundation losing per student funding, that was transitioning them down to the baseline amount. If you saw schools during that transition to foundation increasing funds gradually, that was them increasing to the foundation amount. All schools now should, I think as of last year, they have transitioned to that foundation amount. They are, for instance, I got Orleans funding, and Joy, you sent me an email about Orleans funding compared to North Lawrence schools and why North Lawrence schools gets more than Orleans. Well, actually, for state funding, Orleans gets more per student than North Lawrence. Orleans, and I don't know what year I'm looking at, so I apologize for that, but it got $6,811 per student. And from the state, North Lawrence got $6,773 per student. But when you add in federal money and local funding, then they are higher than that. So the difference is not in what the state is giving North Lawrence versus Orleans, it is in how much local and federal money they're getting. And you'll see those discrepancies throughout the state. But in terms of teacher salaries, I will say this, increments have not been taken away. Schools can, and still many do, give pay increments each year. Those are local decisions, and as Steve and I have said many times, he will look at the runs for all of the school districts in his district, and I look at the runs for all the schools in my district, and the House version and the Senate version, and there's often multiple versions of this school funding formula going through the process, and he and I get together and say which of these is going to be the best out of the formula that we can get for our districts. And we had the best possible outcome that we could have gotten in the last budget. Some schools did see some funding decreases because they're losing students. And I understand that you still have a building to pay for, and you still have, you're not losing students across the board. It's not like you're losing a whole classroom full of students. You might lose 20 students in K through 12. And that is not something that's that manageable, which is why Steve and I have been pushing for small schools grants. But I have a corporation in my district, K through 12, 234 students in K through 12. That just is not sustainable. And so we have to look for ways that we can have savings. I do agree with the need to be able to pay our newer teachers more, but to be very honest, from what I've seen, for instance, in Salem, you've got teachers that are making $80,000 a year who've been here, and new teachers who've been here less than 10 years that are making $36,000 a year. And the issue is not that the schools don't want to pay those newer teachers more, it's that the union requires that they give them all the same treatment. And so if you give them a percentage increase, then those ones that are making the highest amount are going to get a higher salary than those at the lower end. And so I would like to see us do something that we can incentivize a higher, more like the state police, where you can give them a matrix, if you will, that can give the newer teachers a quicker increase in their salaries. But that would require the cooperation of the ISTA and changing the way that we operate so that we can pay those newer teachers more quickly. Finally, tying administrative pay to teacher salaries, I think, is something that we should look at. I mean, we had in Salem, for instance, the superintendent was getting a $6,000 a year across the board increase per her contract, and to her credit, that was the contract that was entered. Administrators were getting a $4,000 a year raise, and the teachers were not getting raises, and if they did, the teacher raises were $200 a year, or $210 a year. So if we somehow tied administrative pay increases, if you're going to give the administrators a raise, then you also have to give a similar percentage basis raise to your educators. That might help us to incentivize money going into the right place, which is to give our teachers a higher salary. They do have a very difficult job. I was in the classroom yesterday for the St. Patrick's Day party in my son's classroom, and I was only there for 45 minutes, and I was absolutely exhausted. So I know that our teachers work very hard, and we need, and they're doing a great job, particularly in our school system. We've got really, really great teachers here and throughout our districts. But I think the issue is the only fair way to distribute the funds is to follow the student. Steve and I will continue to push for small schools grants, but I want to look for ways that we can, as the East Washington superintendent mentioned, let's find innovative ways to allow the schools to get savings, to generate revenue. For instance, if the school corporation wanted to lease part of their property to a cell phone tower or something like that, those are opportunities that we should take advantage of. Any other ways we can utilize outside resources to help fund those school corporations too, because the reality is we're losing students to more urban areas, to areas where there are jobs. So not only am I going to be focused on trying to give the support we can to the schools that are here, but also I'm going to be looking for ways to get broadband here, to bring jobs here, so that we can keep the student base and increase that student population to keep these schools funded where they need to be, and I'll keep working on that.
Thank you for those responses. Yes?
I'm Ian Terrell, and of course I was an educator. I want to assure everybody in the room I never made $80,000. So don't even start there. And I never got a $4,000 a year raise. So I don't know where it's coming from now, but anyway. And I don't complain because these teachers work so hard. My question, I'm now very interested in our drug problem. You guys are very interested in our drug problem. You are going to perhaps give us some counselors in our schools that are going to be social counselors rather than academic counselors. We want them now. You said you were going to give them. We talked about a school. Who's going to pay for them? If it's going to be thrown right into this mixture that we have now, it's just taking money away. Salem is not rehiring teachers, and our classes are getting bigger. That's the way we're evening out what we're not getting. And does your school today? Are your classes seeming to get bigger? Are you rehired? Yeah. So we've got to be real careful. We're managing on this money. We're having some taken away from us. We're saying this wonderful thing that we need, but who is going to pay for it? Because our schools can't afford to do everything they're doing now. and pay for that. And thank you so much for what you've been doing. So,
All right, Dan Terrell, who's a retired teacher from Salem, basically is addressing the question of certain social and societal issues that schools have to deal with, more and more instead of education, namely the drug problem. If school counselors are provided for somehow legislatively and added to school staff, who actually pays for that? Does that drive out teachers and put more students in each class? So how are school counselors for social issues and not educational issues paid for?
That's not part of the funding formula. There's an additional, at least in the current budget, when we have bills such as this, like school resource officers, et cetera, there's an additional funding mechanism for those types of things. But I do think it'll start as a pilot project so we can figure out, how we can get the best use. So we may have one suicide prevention coordinator who works in lots of different schools, et cetera. But at this point, it's not part of the funding formula. It would be in addition to that.
Yeah, I think it's a line item that's in the budget. There's some money in there that's set aside for that. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head because the budget's like huge, so I don't remember exactly, but if there's something set aside about that there is some money set aside. And I'm like Senator Houchin, I think that probably part of our issues maybe can be resolved helpfully through maybe some of our schools working together, our local schools working together. If we have a situation where one school's classroom gets lower, maybe that teacher from the other school may have more in that year. So maybe there's some way we can cooperate between our school systems within, like our county, to work together, to help with some of the support issues that we need. I think that would be good if we could do more of that. I know the schools do some. I know they work together quite a bit. But any more that we can do about that, I think would really help, because sometimes, we just don't duplicate all the same services and the same things in all the schools. Maybe there's a way we can help to work together.
One other thing while we're on the topic of schools, congratulations to the East Washington Lady Musketeers on their state championship. I believe it's the first ever state championship in any sport in Washington County.
If you get a chance, I'd love to bring them to the state house.
Well, they're coming up Monday. Yeah, they're coming up Monday to... Sure, come with them. They're coming up Monday. We're going to do an honoring resolution, a joint resolution in the House and Senate. We've arranged for them also to spend some time with Governor Houchin while they're there in his office.
Yeah, this has been a special basketball year in Washington County, with the Eastern girls winning the state title and the Salem boys having one of their better records, and West Washington winning the sectional. And so it's been a good year for basketball. Unless you have something to do with Bloomington. Next question, yes.
I'm Deidre Gottbreath, like I said earlier. I'm a nurse by trade in Louisville, and also a small farmer, and so have joint interest on all aspects that we're talking about this morning. But we've talked about a lot of the interest points for us as agriculturalists. Obviously, we could talk about many, many more, but I'm kind of interested in not beating this down to a pulp, but we've talked about like broadband and what that can bring back to our rural communities, but I'm kind of interested in a little bit more of rural access to adequate health care resources, and broadband obviously ties into that with a lot of the telemedicine and things like that, but really interested to hear what you guys have working with that. Thank you.
Okay, Deidre Gottbreath, who's part of the Gottbreath family along Dust Creek. Well, she's a nurse by training and profession, and so she basically has a question about access to health care in rural communities, and is there anything that the legislature can do to maybe technologically facilitate that?
Yes, thank you for the question, Deidre. Actually, in public health, we worked on a couple different telemedicine bills, telehealth, telemedicine bills, that will actually improve rural access to more highly trained professionals or specialists in certain areas. And we've taken away, there used to be a 20-mile limitation on being able to do that. We've eliminated the 20-mile, it's in the Senate now. But anyway, we've eliminated that 20-mile barrier, so it's going to create a lot more opportunities. And in fact, we're hoping that maybe it can even help us with some of these addiction programs that we're going to work with, because we can bring addiction specialists, from other areas that we can use through this too. I also have another bill that actually is going to expand, it's going to actually create telepharmacy, so that there may be some pharmacies that can be put in some of these rural areas that can be operated through a telepharmacy procedure. It will help with areas that are outside of our normal communities that have the bigger drugstores and big box stores in them and things like that, so it'll be able to do that. So I think, we're definitely looking at that. I think that is one of our great opportunities to improve the health in Indiana, is by being able to create better access across the whole state, especially in the rural areas. So yes, definitely, that's one of our priorities.
And, Senator Head, who's also working on that suicide prevention, is working on a telehealth bill that it's aimed at juveniles, being able to get prescription refills, et cetera, without having to physically go to that physician's office. So once they're seen one time, they're evaluated, then for subsequent prescription type refills, they can do that through telemedicine. And so that's a bill that has moved out of the Senate over to the House, and I expect that will take effect. I think that there was a concern with the drug issues that we have, that it would be expanded anything beyond pediatrics at this point. But we're going to try that out and see how that works for especially our rural populations. I think there is some grant funding available for telehealth care in rural areas. I was on a radio program over in Bloomington with a lady that works for the Rural Healthcare Indiana agency, and she was talking about some programs for telehealth care in rural areas. So I do think we'll see an expansion of that in the coming years as we come to be more technological, and hopefully will help with broadband in addition in these areas. And I appreciate Jack, you talking about mainstream and what they're doing with the Economic Growth Partnership, and that's been huge for the area. Had that Agile Networks deal gone through, it would have been a competition to mainstream and all the things that you've done. So I'm glad that we're clear from that, and mainstream can continue to do their expansion here throughout southern Indiana.
Also, I will mention too, a couple years ago we passed some legislation that allowed for school health clinics. I don't know if some of you may know about that, but West Washington is actually getting one. The Crothersville has had one for a year now, I think, and it's working out very well. It was kind of a pilot project they started off with, and you guys have one. Yeah. You're getting one, or you have?
We're getting one.
You're going to get one. Okay, yeah. I was thinking that maybe Salem and Eastern's going to also get them. So it'll actually be utilizing, or the one from West Washington, I think, will be utilizing some telemedicine via that. So it'll be for the students, the employees, and even family members who can come into the clinic. So it'll really improve access, I think, for a lot of folks.
Any more questions?
Okay, I'm Rhonda Green, perennial candidate and whatnot, and IndianaProud.com, and that's where this video is going to be posted, probably later today. I have a couple, maybe three kind of questions to go ahead and ask. First, I want to go ahead and approach voter fraud. What have you done basically to go ahead and curtail that? In Indiana, it is legal to vote more than one time, and the last time is the one that counts. Also, to do an absentee ballot, you do not have to have your Social Security number or any real identification on it. You can actually apply to vote without those identifying numbers. All right. I'd like to see the communities crack down on soft voter fraud, or like helpers. What Doug Campbell was thrown in jail basically for in 2012. I know it goes on, and even though it's like helping or we really need to crack down on that. Does that make sense? And I would like to see the voter history and active voter lists made public online so that people can actually check their voting history themselves. If you are going to have, like President Trump has said, that we're going to crack down on voter fraud, there's no way to find out about it. If you go in as a task force, you don't know their neighbors, or if it's usual or unusual to have 20 people in a house. This is an easy way to go ahead and kind of figure out if there is something glitchy. Already done that on Indiana Proud for Washington County. You can actually access and look at what your voter history is. And we've already had, like, somebody's posted on Facebook that they've seen a discrepancy. So I know that there's a thing against, we don't have voter fraud. It would be surprising if we didn't. Okay, there we go. I think that's, there we go on that. I want to broach legalizing marijuana. Understand, even though I'm libertarian, I am not pro-drug use. I am not, when our kids were young, the school wanted to put our kids on Ritalin, and we pulled them out altogether, and they turned out fine. But I am not pro-drugs. But I would like to see, I would rather have a kid be caught with a bag of pot than I would meth or crack or whatever it is, or the pills that you get illegally or what have you. If you legalize marijuana, then the families can kind of take a hold of it and say, have Uncle George talk to him. He's got a pot, they don't have to deal with possibly the police intervention or what have you. And you can catch kids going down the wrong path, so to speak, a lot easier. And it's a lot less violent a drug than, say, meth or heroin. And I'd also like to ask, what are you doing about, like, a needle exchange? Once again, I'm not a promoter of drugs, but I don't want to see a kid fall into something and then not be able to pull themselves out, have to deal with AIDS for the rest of their life because they didn't have 50-cent syringes to go ahead and deal with. Does that make sense? Okay. I think that's good.
All right, Rhonda Green from Campbellsburg, who basically operates IndianaProud.com, which basically videotapes public meetings such as this one, and you can see it on the internet. She's basically addressed 3 topics for our guests to respond to. Number 1, voter fraud. Is there any legislative or administrative action about voter fraud, particular way absentee ballots are managed? The next question was, where is Indiana on the legalization of marijuana? And thirdly, what's the status of needle exchange programs throughout the state, like we've seen in Scott County and Clark County? So, Steve?
Thank you, Rhonda. We discussed the election fraud issue out front, and I told you I'll have to do a little research on that because I'm on the elections committee and I don't know all the details. But I will look into that and see if I can understand more about it. Generally speaking, Indiana probably has, as far as I know, we have some of the stronger election laws than some of the other states around. Washington State, I think they have mail-in ballots. All theirs are mail-in ballots. So some of those places have different kinds of things. Some don't have to show picture ID. That's another thing. So we do have some pretty good things on our statutes here in Indiana. But I will have to check into the other things that you're talking about because I don't know the answer to that. We'll talk about the marijuana issue. We do have a bill that the CBD oils, the cannabidiol oils, there's a group of children around the state that have a certain type of epilepsy seizures that's uncontrollable by normal medications at all. So their parents have formed a coalition and they've been working to try to get this CBD oils available. They have a very low THC content. It's 0.3% or less. So there isn't really a lot of the hallucinogenic type activity from that. And we passed it out of the House, and I think the Senate passed it out of the Senate. There's some problems with it, though, because, number one, we don't know how we're going to get it. You know, if it's passed, how do families get it, okay? Because we can't have it in pharmacies because it's a Controlled One substance under the federal DEA. They have it listed as a Controlled One substance. We can't have that in a pharmacy. That's a Controlled Two substances is our limitations, so we can't have those. We can't dispense them out of a pharmacy, so that's a problem. I think probably the biggest thing about it, I'm a little concerned about the legislation because I mean I support it for the people that need it, but I don't know how it's going to happen in our state. I mean, there's not the infrastructure to provide it or to make sure it's quality control. You know, we want to make sure it's the right stuff. You don't have, it's not coming from a pharmaceutical manufacturer that does quality assurance testing on it. So how do we do that? How do we get it dispensed to the patients? How, you know, all those questions have to be answered. Now, the one thing that I think that the bill could do is if a patient goes to a doctor in Kentucky, which they have it legal down there, if they get it out of Kentucky somehow, or another state, and they have it in our state, you know, it might protect them from the legal aspects of it. So that might be that's the only thing I see that could be a positive from that right now for the folks that do it. As far as the marijuana, you know, I have a real problem with that because it is a gateway drug. You know, people say a lot of things about it, but it is a gateway drug because we know from studies that a lot of people that start smoking marijuana end up moving on to these other things because they want to get a new high, and it just kind of goes down the way. The other thing you talked about, needle exchange. You know, I support that. I don't like it, but I support it because I've seen what happened in Scott County. You know, it's a harm reduction measure. It's not, we don't really want to be out there promoting it, drug use with needles, but, you know, people are doing it. There's been some positive results in Scott County. They're getting about a 95 to 96% return of syringes and needles back in the exchange program, which is good because before they were laying on the playgrounds. They were out where little children could be exposed to them. You know, that's a problem. I don't want to see some young child get HIV or Hep C exposure because they were on a ball diamond playing ball and they picked up a bad syringe and got stuck. I don't think that's good. So that's one thing. The other point of it I would say is there's a lot of those people that have come out of the woodwork over in Scott County that nobody knew about before. They've had contact with healthcare professionals. They have over 100 in treatment programs right now. So that's a positive. Some of those people are actually getting their lives back together. So, I mean, there is some good things to it. It's just a small piece of the puzzle. You know, we have a lot of problems related to that. There's no silver bullet. That's just one small piece of the puzzle. As far as I'm concerned, that's how I look at it. And I think, you know, there are areas that we don't want. The cost of Hep C is $80,000 to treat it. You know, so we have to kind of look at all those things. So.
Okay. On voter fraud, we do have a voter ID law in the state of Indiana which requires that you show you are who you say you are when you show up to vote. I do think there are things we can do legislatively to make sure that we are one of the states that are very strict on voter rights, but we could do better. And so I'm on the elections committee, and I'll look for ways that we can tighten that up. You can look up your own voter information on IndianaVoters.com, and in fact, when there were some accusations of alleged voter fraud going on in the last election, the Secretary of State's office was encouraging people to go on IndianaVoters.com where you could look up your own voter registration to make sure that it was accurate. So there are those things. As far as publicizing voter history, I don't know that that is something that the general public would support, that everybody's was accessible. But we do have it now where if you log into IndianaVoters.com, you can put in your name and your birth date and find out, check your own voter record. I don't support legalizing marijuana. Colorado, the state of Colorado, did legalize both recreational and medical marijuana. We do know it's a gateway drug, and of course you're going to expect the wife of the prosecutor to feel this way because we're dealing with this issue, but they teens or others that start smoking marijuana, they think it's harmless. It leads to, and it's evidentiary, that it leads to the abuse of other drugs, including meth and heroin and all these other things. So I can't support legalizing marijuana. In Colorado, after they legalized marijuana, they saw an increase in overdose deaths, an increase in ER visits for drug-related issues, as well as an increase in child overdose fatalities. Colorado's experiment on legalizing marijuana, if you talk to government officials there, they've not seen an increase in revenue from legalizing it and taxing it, because they're spending that excess on health care and dealing with and law enforcement and ER visits, etc., dealing with this issue. So I don't support that. And the needle exchange, I also don't support. I mean, we've got a gentleman here who's diabetic, and we are not giving folks with diabetes needles, but we're giving heroin addicts needles. And it's not, from my view and from what I've seen, it is not an exchange, it is a giveaway. People will go in and they will be asked, what's your habit, how many needles do you need a day? And they will be given, in fact, I think 600 needles were given out to 5 people in Clark County when the needle exchange started there. So I do think it has contributed to the reduction in HIV, and for that I certainly recognize that it has reduced the spread of HIV, which is not unimportant, but I'm more concerned about the message that we're sending, that the state is supporting the continuation of an addiction, and it has led to an increase in overdose deaths. And so even though people are accessing the needle exchange in Scott County, there are more overdose deaths as a result, maybe not as a result of, but following the exchange, we're seeing an increase in overdose deaths. So I wouldn't want to see us do an exchange here. I would want to see us have treatment options and be able to get people on the right track that way, rather than the state coming in and saying, you know, what you're doing is okay. We're going to support your habit. The other concern that I have with needle exchanges in some places, and I'm not sure if this is true in Austin and in Clark County, but I do know that folks have gone into needle exchange programs in other parts of the state and accessed other paraphernalia, like a cookie pot and other things that will facilitate a heroin user in making their product to shoot and inject into their arm. So I don't support that. I did not vote for the needle exchange when it came up last time, and I certainly wouldn't be supportive of it in the future.
Last question.
I have 2 items. I'm on the Indiana State Armory Board and also on Fort Knox Council, and I just wondered if there's any veterans issues in this session or military issues. Secondly, tax incremental financing is a great economic tool, but it's also a hidden tax on the taxpayer. And I would like to know if there's been any discussion or anything on maybe reverting some of those funds back to the school systems, which is losing money, and to these school systems that are hurting. So that's just a question.
All right, Jack Heron has been given the privilege of asking the last question of the day. He had 2 items that he'd like our guests to address. Number 1, are there any veterans issues that are presently being presented to the General Assembly for consideration? And the second one is on tax incremental financing, which is a complicated way of attempting to use, I won't explain it, but it deals with economic development, but there's some concern that it might be hurting school funding as a way to maybe get some school distribution through TIF funding. So, Representative Davisson.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, actually, in the budget, we actually put some language in there that's going to give veterans, the retirees on their retirement money. It'll give them some tax relief from that, up to 16%, like it is on Social Security for their retirement funds, because we're one of the states that haven't done that in the past. So we're trying to move forward so we can keep more of our servicemen and women retirees in our state. I think that'll be a good thing for them. There's a couple other things out there. I can't put my finger right on them off the top of my head, but there's a couple other bills that are affecting veterans in some ways that I know of. And we, as far as the TIF language that you're talking about, we we're very concerned about the TIFs really put a hurt on a lot of the schools and all the local units of government. I mean, they do some wonderful things, that's no doubt, but they also take some money away from some of these other entities that could use it in many circumstances. So we had some language, we were trying to get into a bill to actually do a little look at that and try to see if we could maybe release some of that money to all the local units of government, because sometimes some of the TIFs collect more money than they actually need. They just keep collecting it. They're paying on bonds and things, but they may collect more money than what they need to pay on those bonds each year. And if we could take a look at the way we could maybe release some of that excess money back to the local units that would get it in that first place to begin with, like the schools and like local towns and cities and all the different entities that would receive that money, there's a possibility there's a way that we could do that. Well, that's what we're trying to look at. So hopefully we can figure out a way to do that in the future. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. There are some discussions about reevaluating TIF. I don't think there's anything specific legislatively on that this time, but I would look for us to begin to discuss that in the upcoming sessions and how we reevaluate TIF and to address this very issue about getting excess revenue to schools and make sure that we're utilizing that process, if we're going to use it, in the most efficient way possible, not just for that district, but for the entire community that has implemented that. Veterans issues, I know of one bill that is it creates a lottery ticket scratch-off that the proceeds go to veterans programs. And so it's the only lottery ticket specific to an issue. So any revenue generated from this particular lottery ticket would go back then to funding veterans programs.
All right, we've had a wide range of topics that have been discussed this morning, and our legislators have done a very good job in responding to them, and we have to give up the room real soon, so I'm going to adjourn our public session to the third house session. And I wish to thank Principal Derek Smith and Superintendent Sue Ellen Reed for offering these facilities through the Salem Community Schools, and the staff that makes this available to us. Again, we wish to thank the Washington County Chamber of Commerce for co-sponsoring the event. Tony Owens, a board member here. Got other board members here today, Tony? Okay. And then the Indiana Farm Bureau, and there are several of you at the Farm Bureau today. Farm Bureau members, raise your hand, I guess. Thank you for helping to jointly sponsor this. And special thanks then to Senator Erin Houchin and Representative Steve Davisson for being our special guest today and making this a very informative public event. And see you next year. Thank you.